Hi, I'm John DeVore. Welcome to the DeVore Fidelity YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking about a record, actually several records, but it's not going to be the usual live album recommendation. And that's because I realized that I haven't been doing any classical music. I've really only done one video that had classical music in it. And that's sort of because the idea of a live record is different when you're talking about classical LPs. A lot of classical music is in fact recorded live in an auditorium with an audience, but it really doesn't have the same meaning as a live rock record or a live jazz record does. So I was looking at my record racks and trying to decide what I would do for a classical piece. And I thought it would be fun to do a deep dive into one piece using several different records of that. So different performances of the same piece. And I chose a piece of chamber music because chamber music was one of my first musical loves. I love chamber music. I grew up with my mother playing chamber music in the house. She was a musician. And so there was a lot of Schubert and Brahms and Beethoven just happening live in the house all the time. So the house was filled with the energy of chamber music. And the piece is the Trout. It's Schubert's Trout Quintet. So I went fishing for trout. It's Schubert's Trout Quintet. It is not your usual piano quintet. It's a piano quintet, but normally a piano quintet would be a piano added to a string quartet. So it would be a piano, two violins, a viola, and a cello. This one is a little different in that it's a piano, one violin, one viola, one cello, and one double bass. And this gives the whole thing a sort of a deeper voice. It gives it a richer sonority. It's a beautiful piece, in my opinion. It's a piece written by Franz Schubert. Schubert is another composer who died very young, like Mendelssohn, who I talked about in the other classical music video I talked about. He died when he was 30 or 31, in his early 30s at some point. He wrote this piece when he was 22, but it remained unpublished for his life, which makes me think that Schubert himself didn't think of it as one of his important or major pieces, because he was extremely prolific and he did publish a lot of work while he was alive. I chose it because I love it and because it is the first piece of music, it is the first piece of classical music that I remember becoming aware of. And I think that's because it's called the Trout. A kid isn't necessarily going to remember something that's called the quartet in B-flat major, opus 26, number 4. But they're going to remember something called Trout. And that said, it was also, my mom loved the piece, so the record was played quite a bit in the house. But first, a little bit more about the piece. So the Schubert did not call it the Trout. It was the Forellen Quintet. The Trout nickname came later, and it was because one of the movements in it uses a theme that was developed in an earlier Schubert piece. It's actually a Schubert lieder, a Schubert song. The Schubert lieder it's another very important chunk of music. My favorite versions of Schubert lieder are often by this team here, Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau and Gerald Moore on piano as an accompanist. Fischer-Dieskau was an incredible baritone, and his version of Schubert's other lieder, the Winterreisen, is my favorite of that. And I will probably do a Schubert lieder video at some point as well. But we're not talking about this piece. We are talking about this piece. So this is the version that I grew up listening to. It is members of the Pascal Quartet. It's played on the slower side. So what I did on all of these is, rather than try to listen to the entire piece, I listened to the first movement of each of these versions. The first movement is called Allegro Vivace, which means that it's supposed to be played fairly quickly in a spirited kind of way. This is not really that. This is definitely on the slower side, but it feels to me like a very carefully chosen tempo. They do it well. Their expressiveness and dynamics suit their pace. The performance is a little bit on the rough side. though they are playing nicely as a unit. And sonically, it's a little rough as well, a little dark and muddied and a bit distorted. Not a great sounding version, unfortunately. Next up is the Tashi Quartet. They were kind of a superstar group led by Peter Serkin on piano. This is only 3 of the members of the Tashi. So it's Peter Ida Kavavian on viola and Fred Sherry on cello, who I love. Great cellist. This one is beautifully played. It's on the slow side as well, and it is maybe a little overly dramatic. The piano and the violin playing on this version are perfect. So good. About halfway through the first movement, there's an interplay between the piano and the violin. There's these 16th notes, sort of a call and response, where it starts with the piano and then the violin will come in and play that same passage. And on this, it's done perfectly, impeccably. The quality of tone on the violin matches the quality of the playing on the piano perfectly. Really quite beautiful. The cello playing is really dynamic and quite beautiful as well. I have to say, as a group, it's not really totally unified. Most Tashi recordings are not like that. Most Tashi recordings, they really are playing as a unit. But maybe because of the 2 extra added members, they get becomes a little bit wandering, but it is really quite a beautiful rendition. Our next one is the most modern of the ones that I have. This is one of the super deluxe packages from Deutsche Grammophon on vinyl. It's Anne-Sophie Mutter this is definitely sort of a superstar kind of lineup here. It is played way too fast. I mean, Allegro Vivace is supposed to be at a high pace. It's supposed to be played fairly quickly. This one they overdo it, but they're all such good players that they can sort of get away with it. But in my opinion, it doesn't really cut it. We miss a lot of the subtlety in the expression in the piece, in my opinion. Sonically, not great either. The next one is the Phillips. This one has Arthur Grumiaux on violin, and it's not a normal group that plays together, so it's a bit of a pickup group here, but it's beautifully played. I think the pacing, the tempo is perfect. Beautifully done. Dynamics are exquisite. The playing, the piano and the interplay of the piano and the violin, again on this one, are really nailed. Really beautifully done. Sonically, unfortunately, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The piano sounds like it was recorded down a long hallway that was filled with a surplus of sofas and drapes and stuff like that. Really kind of muddied on top. Very sort of dark and sort of missing quite a bit, but very well played. It's a nice version. There may be other pressings out there that sound better, and it's something, if I was to come across this in a $1 or $5 bin, I would grab it just to see if the pressing was better, because it's a really good performance. Next up is an older Deutsche Grammophon. This is an older Tulip label pressing. This one is Eschenbach on piano, Christoph Eschenbach on piano. It is a proper tempo, and it is quite steady, but to a fault. It almost feels like a slow march. It's a little relentless in the tempo. It's not a great performance in terms of ensemble playing. The violin is definitely a little bit on the hot side, not a great sounding violin. Piano's pretty good sounding. But overall, there's even some intonation issues on this one. Really not one of my favorite performances. Next we have the Budapest Quartet, or members of the Budapest Quartet. The Budapest Quartet is among my very favorite quartets. They've put out many of my favorite versions of a lot of pieces. A lot of Mozart, a lot of Beethoven. Really fantastic players. They absolutely play as a unit in general, and I feel like their expressiveness and their tempos tend to be really right on. This one, however, is not one of my favorites from them. They are playing as a unit, but for example, that interplay in the middle of the movement where the piano and the violin are interchanging those 16th notes kind of misses a bit. I feel like maybe because the pianist is added on to this group, I don't quite get the feeling that the pianist is within the single organism of the Budapest Quartet in this piece. Sonically, it's kind of distant sounding, which is not atypical for these are much older recordings. This is the RCA version. This is one of my favorites. It's the Festival Quartet. It's played definitely on the slow side, and it is very lush, and it has really a lot of drama in it, but the instrumental timbres are juicy, really beautifully done in this. The 16th note interplay is slow but perfect, and then just following that in the slower part of the movement, it's gorgeous. Really good ensemble playing on this, beautiful sounding. There were stereo versions as well, which I haven't heard, and I'm guessing there's probably better pressings of this than what I have, but a good one. Slow, but good on this one. This is my favorite version. This is on Angel. This is the Amadeus Quartet, members of the Amadeus Quartet playing this. This has the perfect tempo, in my opinion, for the first movement. It has a beautiful, light-footed, spirited pace, beautiful dynamics, great expressiveness on this. The tempo has just the right amount of bounce and propulsion through. The playing is fantastic. The absolutely beautiful playing together. I don't know if Roxy's blocking the cover. They're absolutely playing together. Sonically, it's bright. I mean bright in the right way, in that they turn the lights on in the studio and you can see the interplay between them. You can see the colors and the intent in the performance. And with the lights on, you really get a sense of the soundstage. The imaging on this is beautiful. Instruments really do have their place. They have their sonic envelopes are intact. So for sonics and for performance, in my opinion, this is my favorite of the ones that I have. Which means this is far from an exhaustive survey, but there you go. That's what I had. Thanks very much for hanging in there with me, and hopefully I'll see everyone soon at the next video. Thanks. Bye.